Hello, Greenleaf. Today is Sunday, March 29th. I'm talking to you from home, living that quarantine life. If you can believe it, it is our third Sunday of not being able to worship together in person. And I just got to say, we really miss you guys. It's a bit of a bummer. But even still, it's been great being able to have a lot of extra phone calls with you, meetings over Zoom, connecting on Slack. If you're in our Greenleaf family and you are not yet in on our communications hub on Slack, please join us. We'd love to have you. All you got to do is go to greenleafvineyard.com/Slack, enter your email address, download the app on your favorite device, and boom, you're in. And if you're new to it and you need any help at all, let us know. We're here for you. Today, I have our fourth message in our Lenten sermon series called Unbound, Live Freely and Lightly. And what we're doing in this series is considering what kinds of things we can take out of our lives in order that we might be able to receive more of God. And where we're taking this idea from is from Matthew 11 in the Message version, where Jesus says this: "Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly." You know, when we're driving down the road, we're used to obeying the signs, right? We see all different kinds of signs. We have speed limit signs, right? And we know that if it says 55, we really should stick at 55, right? In the city limits here, if it's 35 in most places, you stick to 35. In school zones, when school's actually in session, it's even lower. But of course, we also have stop signs when you really have to come to just a complete stop. And what we know is that if you're not paying attention to the signs, it can get real dangerous real fast. And it's sort of dangerous with speeding, right? I mean, there's certainly bad things that can happen from speeding. It's definitely more dangerous if we're not paying attention and we're disobeying stop signs. It's one thing to go 55 and a 45. It's another thing to roll completely through a stop sign that you just weren't paying attention to or weren't heeding. And I think these kinds of street signs actually serve as a really great metaphor for how we live our lives. You know, we're a very active people. We're always on the go, right? We're always on the move. We've always got somewhere to go, someone to see, something to do. We're always moving and shaking something. And if there's one thing that's true about us as a culture, I think, is that we really don't like to slow down. And if it's true that we dislike slowing down, then I think it's definitely true that we despise stopping. You know, slowing down is for lazy people. Stopping is for losers. But in the same way that we have to pay attention to these signs when we're driving, we need to learn to pay attention to signs when we're just living our lives, of when it's appropriate to slow down, and definitely paying attention when it's time to stop. And I've got a message for you today, and what we're going to talk about is unbusy. Freedom from busyness. And the good news is that God has graciously given us this built-in opportunity to stop, and it's called the Sabbath. And if I could just give my own personal sales pitch for the Sabbath, what I would say is just simply this: that learning how to practice a Sabbath rest has been the single most powerful thing that has enabled me to live freely and lightly, the way that Jesus wants us to live. That just building in this regular rhythm has really breathed all kinds of life into me and into my family. And so what I want to do this morning is I want to give you 2 thoughts on whys, sort of the whys behind the Sabbath, and then 4 really practical thoughts on how this would work out in your normal life. If you're already doing it, then this is a way you can kind of recalibrate sometimes. And if it's brand new, maybe this is going to whet your appetite a little bit to live that kind of free and light life that Jesus has for you. And the first thing that I'm going to share with you comes from Deuteronomy chapter 5, where Moses is recounting to the people of Israel the giving of the 10 Commandments. And it turns out one of the 10 Commandments has to do with the Sabbath. Here's what he says. It says, "Observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, as the Lord your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. You know, Sabbath is more than just a day off of work. It is meant to be this rhythm of working for 6 days, resting for one. Being on the go for 6 days, stopping for one. Laboring for 6 days, resting for one. And so whenever you hear Sabbath day, what I want you to think is stop day, right? When you hear the word Sabbath, I want you to think stop. And that's even what the literal language means. It means to cease, to just completely hit the brakes. So Sabbath is not a slow down day. It's actually intended to be a stop day. And so the first why, though, that I want to give you of why God has given us the Sabbath and why this might be beneficial for you is that the Sabbath was God's gift to a people accustomed to slavery. You know, we have to remember the historical context that Israel were God's people. They were enslaved in Egypt for 400 years, and he set them free. Now, what is it like to be in slavery? You work all the time. They never got to stop. They never got to choose when to stop. They never had built-in days where they just didn't work. They were worked all the time under Pharaoh's rule. Slaves work nonstop, but God's people have the opportunity to rest. This is beautiful. This is good news for us. You know, we work nonstop. We have work available at our fingertips 24/7. It's hard for us sometimes to get away from this. Many of us, we work from home, and how do you step out of that? I think honestly that busyness is the illness of our culture. More than anything else, this is a thing that is threatening our very well-being. And while thankfully slavery has been abolished in our country, this dehumanizing system that we're still honestly kind of recuperating from, but now we live under a new kind of slavery, where our slave masters are the clock. Our slave masters are our to-do list that we even make for our own selves. That sometimes we can't point the finger at someone else, but this drive to do, this drive to be productive, really is dehumanizing us and leaves us enslaved. You know, we say things like, well, we want to raise our children to be what? Productive members of society. Being productive is this high value, you know. Or when you bump into someone that you haven't seen in a long time and they say, oh, it's so good to see you. How are you doing? How often do you respond like I do? Oh, man, I'm so busy. Gosh, you just wouldn't believe everything I've got on my plate. We say this as if it's a badge of honor when really it's a symptom of an illness. It's a symptom of something that we are suffering from, that we desperately need to be free from if we really want to live freely and lightly. Eugene Peterson, great pastor and author, says this: if we do not regularly quit work for 1 day a week, we take ourselves far too seriously. And this is certainly true for me. It's still often true. It definitely was years ago when we were first trying to learn how to Sabbath, that it was hard for me to let go and believe that the world was going to go on without me. That if I was somehow stepped back and was not involved, that things would all fall apart. And of course, this is ridiculous. You know, there's a freedom that comes from realizing that I really am kind of indispensable for a 24-hour period, that I'm not that important. The Sabbath is a reminder to us that we are the created, not the creator. That we are the made, not the maker. That we are limited. We are not the limitless one. And Sabbath keeping, and for these reasons, I think is honestly one of the most countercultural things that we can do, because it's a way of saying to our culture that is enslaved to doing, saying, nope, we're going to step out just for a day, and we're just going to be human beings, not human doings. The second why I want to share with you comes from Isaiah 58, where the prophet Isaiah is reminding the people of Israel once again of the importance of the Sabbath. He says, if you keep your feet from breaking the Sabbath and from doing as you please on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight and the Lord's holy day honorable, And if you honor it by not going your own way and not doing as you please or speaking idle words, then you will find your joy in the Lord, and I will cause you to ride in triumph on the heights. I love this. Isaiah is not just reminding God's people that the Sabbath is an important thing to do, like it's just one other ritual they have to obey. But he's saying, this is the thing that is meant to be a delight to you. This is a way that you are meant to access the deep joy that God has for you. And just think about this for a moment. Like, do you have that deep joy and delight in your life? Or could you use more of that? Maybe this is the way in for you. I love this end part too, where he says, I will cause you to ride in triumph on the heights. I think we can hear this as just another metaphorical way of what Jesus said when he says, I will teach you how to live freely and lightly. Right? You will ride in triumph on the heights, not weighted down, not relegated to the plains, the low places of life, but freely and lightly able to just soar in this place of joy and delight. The Sabbath is meant to enable us to live freely and lightly, as opposed to this life that is just bound up and heavy. So the second why that I see in this is that God is more interested in your longevity than in your productivity. You know, even in a secular sense, our culture is really starting to get this. Both science and psychology are really beginning to tell us about the really damaging effects that overwork has on our bodies and on our minds. That is unhealthy, that just going, and constantly pushing ourselves to do more and to do more and to do more really is killing us. That it's really doing harm just as much as if we were driving down the road and disobeying speed limit signs and disobeying stop signs. Just this week, I was listening to a podcast that really illustrated this powerfully for me. This is an Enneagram podcast called Typology, which I highly recommend if you're interested in the Enneagram. But the host was interviewing a well-known pastor and leader named Louis Giglio. If you're not familiar with Louis Giglio, he's the founder of the Passion Movement, which is known mostly for its powerful reach amongst young people. Later on down the road, he also founded Passion City Church, which he is still the pastor of in Atlanta. But in this interview, he shared the story about how about 10 years ago, he had this major anxiety attack, like completely took him out. For about 6 months, he said he was just like a sobbing mess on the floor, because everything had just caught up with him. The pace of life caught up with him, and it just broke him. And he shared, though, about some people that helped him come out of this, the people that were really instrumental in him stepping out and into a place of greater health. And he told his story about a health professional who said this. He says, one of the guys in the medical field that really spoke into my life said, partly what's happened to you is that your brain, your inner mechanism of self, is trying to save you because it thinks you're trying to kill yourself. It's shutting down to preserve you from killing you. Just by all the stress, all the pressure, this pace, this need to meet all the expectations, this need for perfectionism, this need for productivity. We put these things on ourselves. And what was amazing is Louis Giglio had this comment afterwards. He said, you know, what a grace that God has put a shutdown mechanism inside each of us. That God has wired our bodies to say, well, enough is enough. He has wired our brains to say, this is not healthy. You need to take a break. Wayne Mueller, in his book called Sabbath, says this. This was really challenging the first time that I read this. He says, if we do not allow for a rhythm of rest in our overly busy lives, illness becomes our Sabbath. Our pneumonia, our cancer, our heart attack, our accidents create Sabbath for us. You know, sometimes our own bodies or our own circumstances force us into rest, force us into Sabbath where we haven't chosen it. And I've certainly seen this in my own life. I began to notice years ago that migraines were a trigger for this with me, that they were an indication that I was way too stressed, that I was not taking good care of my body, that I was not building in enough Sabbath and rest in my life. And the invitation for us as Christians is to choose rest before rest chooses us, is to choose to stop before we are made to stop. And I don't think that God causes us to get sick. God doesn't inflict illness on us as a means of punishment. But I think he uses those as signs that he can direct our attention to and say with so much love, you really need to slow down. You really need to stop. I don't want you to burn out. I don't want your body to have to shut down. I want you to choose to rest in me now. And I've been wondering a lot over these last couple of weeks even. I just wonder, to a culture that really suffers from this illness of busyness, what if this pandemic is a huge opportunity for us to learn how to slow down, to learn how to stop, for us Christians to learn how to Sabbath? Maybe this actual virus that is threatening us is actually a means by which God can save us from this illness of busyness. Just wonder. So if this is at all interesting to you, right? If as your entire life schedule is kind of upended, maybe this is a chance for you to try out Sabbathing for the first time. Maybe this is a way to kind of rejuvenate that in your life. And if you're interested, here's 4 quick ways, 4 quick aspects, I think, that we ought to consider that are sort of a part of Sabbathing. And the first component we need is rest. And when you consider rest, ask yourself, like, what counts as work for me? What sort of activities might I exclude that feel like work for me? Certainly this would be things connected to your actual occupation, right? So maybe you need to turn off all the notifications on your phone. Maybe you need to leave the books on the shelf. If you've got a home office that you do a lot of work in, maybe you just need to close the door and lock it and give somebody else the key for this time period, right? But just ask yourself, what counts as work for me? And it's interesting, in some cases, I think there's a lot of freedom to play with this. For some of us, it might be really different. And I'll share an example of that in a second, because it's related to the second one, which is renewal. We need rest, and we need renewal. And I would encourage you to ask yourself, like, what can I do that I deeply enjoy? What can I do that will really refresh me and not just entertain me and distract me for a while? What is something I can do that makes me feel human again? Where working has sort of dehumanized me, how can I become human again? One of these things for my wife Angela is she loves to garden. She loves to do yard work. So you can often find her on our Sabbath day outside. She's tending the garden. She's cleaning things up outside. She's hauling mulch around. She's digging up stuff. Whatever it is, she's getting dirty and hot and sweaty. But one of the things we've learned over the years is that is not an appropriate Sabbath activity for me. I kind of hate yard work. I don't think that's an overstatement. I really kind of hate it. And so we've learned over the years that that's a great thing for her to do that brings her renewal. But for me, it feels like work. Now, of course, I still ought to do my part in the yard. So I've had to learn to do yard things in advance of the Sabbath, that I get things done on those previous days so that when I come to Sabbath day, I can do the things that really refresh and renew me. And so you work these things out on your own, right? So we need rest, we need renewal. Third component is we need relationships. One of the unique things about Sabbath that's different than many other spiritual practices in the Christian faith is that this is meant to be communal. Almost all the time, that it's meant to be like a family affair. And so I would encourage you, ask yourself, like, who can I invite into the Sabbath rest with me? Who can I invite to enjoy this with me? What might it look like for our whole family, or for me and my roommates, or whoever you're around, to say, how might we rest together? How can we experience renewal together? What kinds of activities might we even be able to do together that would be refreshing and renewing? Even in this time when we're kind of all on lockdown, right? We're all staying at home. Maybe you don't have people. Maybe you live alone. Maybe you don't live with many other people. Well, maybe there's still some ways that you can connect with other folks and coordinate. Like, what's something that we can do together on this Sabbath day that will build relationships with each other and that will encourage renewal amongst one another? Because, again, with relationships, what we're looking to do here is we're going to deepen our relationship with God on the Sabbath, but we're also deepening our relationship with one another, those people that we really deeply love on the Sabbath. So we need rest, we need renewal, we need relationships, and the fourth and final thing is rhythm. The real power of the Sabbath is in regularity. Sure, if you do it just one time, a one-off thing is good, but that's really just going to feel like a day off. The real power of this comes with repetition and regularity. Again, 6 days of working, 1 day of rest. 6 days of going, 1 day of stopping. And so I would just encourage you to ask yourself, like, when can I take a Sabbath rest? What day of the week would work best for me? What time span can I really do? You know, some of us right now have more kind of flexible free time than we normally have as we're all in self-quarantine. Some of us have a lot less time. Our lives have gotten more chaotic. So if 24 hours just feels intimidating or impossible to you, let me just encourage you to just try this like in a bite-sized way. You know, even if it's just 4-hour time span once a week, go for that. You know, years ago when Angela and I were first really beginning to try out Sabbath, it was a time when we were actually quad vocational, right? We were both pastors and we both were bivocational and had other jobs. And so honestly, just a full day was not doable. And so every week there was this like 4 or 5 hour period that we could do, and we could rest, we could engage in renewal, we could focus on relationships. And so I just encourage you, ask yourself, when can I do it and for how long? And just put it on your calendar. Treat it as sacred and look for that joy and delight that God will have for you in that time period. Look for those ways in which you can be refreshed and renewed so that you can then be ready to dive back into your life.